Okay, thank you guys all for coming. We're very happy to see all of you here. We have a very exciting topic today. We have the intersection of trauma and mental health in higher education presented by Dr. Z and by Garrett McBlair. So we're really thankful for all of you being here, and I hope we all have a super fun time today. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Z.
Thank you, Ella, for introducing us. And then, so today actually we want to introduce a project we actually continue working on. So today, really just a time that both Garrett and I want to talk about some of the ongoing project and how trauma and trauma-informed education really played in higher education. So we are very excited to share about this project. If you don't know about me, I am a faculty member in the Department of Criminal Justice. And then even though my primary education really talking about law, punishment, and policies, but for me as a faculty, I'm really interested into learning about intersectionality of trauma and how trauma brings into the learning process. So to me, learn about trauma is something new, but also very exciting. Actually, in the past a couple of months, I have the privilege to actually work with a couple of colleagues from different departments, and also Garrett actually is on the research team. We're looking at how trauma-informed education looks like in higher education, and then I have that privilege actually attend a training with the ASDEC based in Hutchinson, Kansas. So that really gave me a lot of inspiration in terms of how I would like to implement a trauma-informed education in the classroom, specifically in a university. And now I will give to Garrett to introduce some of his credentials and his, aspirations to work in this field.
Thank you so much. So I've had the privilege of meeting like 90% of you. Either you were in the learning community I worked with, or I used to work at Forsyth Library. So thank you all for supporting us and coming out today. My name is Garrett McBlair. I am earning my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. I have just a little over 2 months to go, so that is exciting and terrifying at the same time, because then I have to be a real adult. I also minored in psychology and philosophy. In philosophy, I focused more on the moral ethics side. And it says right there, certificate in victim advocacy. I actually just received that certificate today, like 30 minutes ago. So I'm pretty excited about that. Research involvement, it's one of my passions here at the university, is helping faculty conduct research. So right now I'm working on a project that's looking at law enforcement officer mental health in rural areas. What does that look like? What are they exposed to? How can we better help law enforcement officers who are struggling with their experiences? As well as something that Dr. Chi mentioned, trauma-informed education in higher education. So what histories do students bring in? How does that affect their learning? And how can we kind of cater the classroom and cater learning to best suit their needs? Campus involvement, I've been on the University Transition and Orientation team, Tiger team. It's my 5th year now. I'm old. And what that's really taught me is, students come from all walks of life. And we undergo training to understand what can those walks of life look like. So something very simple is we learn not to say, are you here with your family? Or are you here with your mom and dad? Because not everyone has a mom, not everyone has a dad. Some people are coming with friends, grandparents. So we have to be a little more conscious of even how we speak. Fraternity and sorority life. I'm a proud member of Sigma Alpha Epsilon. I've been a chapter president for a long time. I just stepped down, but I was also a community ambassador for a while. Oh, am I not speaking loud enough? Sorry. Oh, did you tell me to slow down?
No, I think you should hold the microphone closer to your mouth.
Gotcha. Sorry, I'm terrible with microphones because then I can hear myself, and that's the most terrifying thing I could ever listen to. And then a few weeks ago, I was just appointed the student researcher for the Center for Empowering Victims of Gender-Based Violence. So that is Dr. Chi's research center that she helped co-found, and that is specifically looking at projects and initiatives that bring awareness to topics regarding gender-based violence. So October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, so we're hoping to do a little video series here in a couple weeks about that. Of course, we're talking about mental health, and I'm not a trained mental health provider, I'm not a clinician, but I've had some professional trainings and certifications that have allowed me to kind of understand what mental health looks like and just how to support somebody that I know. It's not about providing a diagnosis, it's not about intervening in a crisis, but it's just how can we support the people around us, and that's what I'll be talking about today. So I'll give it back to you. Also, this is my first professional talk, so I'm sweating bullets.
Garrett did a great rehearsal, so I'm confident that he will deliver a great talk about this research project. So first of all, because it's the Time Talks, we have to find a New York Times article to relate it our today's topic. And then the article we found is actually originally published in 2019 called As Students Struggle with Stress and Depression, Colleges Act as Counselors. This is right before the COVID-19 pandemic. I think right now when we look at this article, it's become much more relevant. So I think it's timely and urgent to talk about such a topic. And if you haven't got a chance to read this article, I just want to bring into some of the highlights from the article. One of it is that students and institutions are grappling with issues like the surge in school shootings and trauma from suicides and sexual assault. But it's not just crises that have shaken this generation, but also that everyday stresses, from anxiety by preparing exams, that final semester struggle by finding a job, and also trying to finishing those big papers, and some other stresses for every day that has become much more challenging nowadays for college-aged students. And in terms of the statistics from the article, they reported more than 60% of college students said they had experienced overwhelming anxiety in the past year. And according to 2018 report from the American College Health Association, almost over 40% of the students, they felt so depressed, they had difficulty functioning. And when you're looking at that response rates, when they have the difficulty to functioning, means they may not be able to really engage in any type of productivity in the classroom, and let alone to engage that campus life. And also college students have experienced financial burdens on a different scale than many of their predecessors. They grew up during the Great Recession and have seen family members lose their jobs and homes. They have great uncertainty about their career prospects and feel pressured to excel academically or risk losing job opportunities. I think this is even more relevant to a university like Fort Hays State University in the rural areas. Many students may experience different level of poverty, and that struggle in the classroom really demonstrated that prevalency of anxiety, stress, and trauma in their learning perspectives. Some other highlights I want to mention in the article. Nationwide, students typically have to wait almost 7 business days for their first appointment with a college counselor. Actually, when we prepared the slides, Garrett mentioned university here did much better job in terms of how to providing services for students, isn't it?
Yeah, one thing that really separates our campus from most campuses is our Fort Hays Health and Wellness Center. Not only is a one-stop shop for physical and mental health needs, but it's free to, the mental health services are free to students, whereas you go to other campuses and the first 2 or 3 sessions are free, but then it's a paywall. And we know students, we're broke. As simple as that, we're broke.
Yeah, and in a way, by having those accessible and affordable resources on campus really help to dealing or intervene with the crisis. And then according to the University of South Florida, many students, they believe they may not need immediate counselor. However, they really hope that they could get some advices regarding time management, anxiety reducing skills, and then really have that healthy and trustworthy relationship with their faculty members. And once again, to help address these issues, the university created relaxation stations where there's massage chairs and sometimes have other activities such as a yoga session, which I think is really relatable to Fort Hays State University here, because I think in the long we have so many flyers really trying to engaging students to not only academically successful, but also living a healthy and happy life. Immediately after introducing the article originally from Time Talks, I really want to bring the audience attention to this important topic, ACEs, or it's called Adverse Childhood Experiences. And this is a topic widely used in psychology, sociology, and even in the criminal justice field. And the reason I think it's very important to bring this concept is that ACEs is one of the most well used or well discussed and defined definition on trauma, but definitely it's not only one way to define trauma. So there's no way we're trying to say ACEs is the only way to look at trauma, but I think it's very instrumental for us to engage in discussion. So trauma is really through a developmental lens. You know, instead of by looking at a traumatic event that almost like one-time shots, when we talk about ACEs, it's really looking at the childhood development and how that trauma might impact the individual's functioning and the behavior in their early adulthood, even carrying in their adulthood. So trauma, when experienced during early childhood, has detrimental consequences. And trauma is very costly for victims and for society. And that resiliency, the turning point of traumatic events, is extremely crucial for individual to engage in a life path that potentially could get out from the traumatic experiences. And one of the lacking of the research is despite the widespread prevalence of childhood trauma, really there is nothing to know how the trauma's biological effects really played into children and until they carry out in their adulthood. So there are some of the preliminary research really focusing on individuals who experience traumatic events such as domestic violence, witnessing crimes, or potentially seeing families breaking up, falling apart. But there's also other type of traumas we really need to take into consideration and see how that impacts everybody's life and how they perceive their immediate environment.
To kind of bring more importance on, the impacts of trauma, looking at adverse childhood experiences, one of the first studies was done in the 90s. And what that study in the 90s found out is when you are exposed to multiple types of these adverse childhood experiences, so violence in the home, sexual abuse, physical abuse, people who have had 3 or 4 encounters with those experiences tend to live about a decade less than people who have not undergone those experiences. So there's even a life expectancy impact. It's not just mental development, there's biological effects.
As what Gary just mentioned, that a lot of the major experiences under ACEs is really focusing on the experiencing violence, abuse, neglect, witnessing violence in the home or the community, and having a family member attempt to die by suicide. So this is the primary ACEs in research that they are trying to focusing on. And the other aspect, the child's environment can determine the individual's ability to navigate and to build that resiliency from the traumatic experiences. And as a matter of fact, if during the early childhood, the experience or traumatic experience cannot be timely intervened, the problem could carry on their early adulthood, such as substance abuse, mental health problems, and most importantly, but also very devastatingly, is the instability due to parental separation, household member being in jail or prison. And that really created a cycle of mental health issues that created additional challenges for the individual to be able to engaging in healthy relationship, being able to be productive in their everyday work and life, and also maybe preventing them from engaging in schoolworks. So all of these are interconnected from a developmental perspective. I don't know why there's a click to test the same here. But here, even though I talk about ACEs is much more from a childhood developmental perspective, I do want to readdress trauma itself could be also other than those violence experience victimizations. In a way, according to other research, is really trauma is exposure to an incident or series of events that emotionally disturbing or life-threatening. So that is very general, and under that or umbrella, you can really describe a lot of experiences. And then another way, actually, according to the Barrie Street Victoria, is a university in, I believe, Vancouver, Canada. They're really looking at trauma from much more everyday standpoint. In a way, they defined trauma is an overwhelming experience that undermines a person's belief that the world is no longer good and safe for them. So as we can see from the definition of ACEs of trauma to the Barrie Street Victoria University's definition of trauma, we're really looking at the wide scale of how trauma may impact or actually realistically present in our everyday life. In order to better understand trauma, ACEs, and the impact of trauma, we do have a video I want to show the audiences.
Any kind of abuse that you can think of, I experienced it as a child.
You know, I knew that there was a lot of things that had happened to me, but I didn't realize that there was like this is a scoring system.
So you take this test, it has 10 questions, says if you have this is what it can do. I have 10 out of 10.
I am a 7 in the ACE score, so I live this. This ACEs is who went down. And when you're a survivor of really traumatic stuff in your life, you never know exactly how that's going to impact you at what age.
I would go through these cycles. Like everything was good for a while and then I'd become all manic and crazy and do these crazy things and wreck these relationships and not realize why. Until I learned about ACEs. Once I learned about ACEs, it was, that's why I did that. Because this is how I knew to survive.
I had a lot of trouble as a teen to get out of dissociating. I just would leave. Sometimes I had trouble coming back. This is something that you perpetuate. Abuse of any kind can be perpetuated, and I've done my hardest to not. It ends with me.
I was courageous to do some of the things I did in my family. I broke 5 generations of sexual abuse in my family.
ACEs taught me a lot. And for me, it was helping kind of close that gap and realizing, okay, I don't have to bear all these scars, and I don't have to be this bad person, and I don't have to be this alcoholic, and I don't have to be this drug addict, and I can feel love, and I have a right to be loved.
Yes, these things happen to people, but that doesn't make you damaged. That doesn't mean that you're any less than, the person next to you, that you're incapable of love or being loved.
I believe that there's many more of us out there. I know there is. When we can get people together to help each other, to create that space and that environment where they can share and begin to heal, that's where success really is.
We need to have a community. And I just want people to know that it doesn't matter what you go through. It's about what you do afterwards.
As you heard from some of the survivors talked about in the video, it's not about what you experience sometimes. Well, let me get it back. It is about what you experience, but also about how you cope with and move forward. And that is the process of building that resiliency. So in our today's presentation, we're really trying to focus on that resiliency part and how we can work together, really address trauma that may present it in higher education settings.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Z. So we did spend quite a bit of time talking about adverse childhood experiences, and we said that, it's a very defined category, but it doesn't describe all traumatic events that can occur. Does anyone have ideas of something else that could be considered traumatic, but it isn't those personal experiences of violence or mental health in the home?
Car accident?
Yeah, a car accident. Using a personal example, as a child, my mother was passing a semi that then tried to turn in front of us, and that is still something I've been able to overcome that, but for the longest time afterwards, I had dreams about that. It made me afraid of semis on the road. So if I wasn't able to become resilient and overcome that, that could still be something that has effects today. Anyone else? Any other ideas?
Forcing religion on your kid.
Yeah, I don't know where to go with that. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Forcing belief systems that, you don't really consider your own. So that could create some hostility towards people of that religion, people you may not even know. But just because you had such negative associations with a prior experience that you're just now unwilling to, or you're not able to civilly interact with people of that belief. Something else I was thinking about are natural disasters. So, I mean, there's a good chance that a student at Fort Hays State University was there when Greensburg happened, or when Joplin happened. And those are incredibly traumatic experiences. So that was just to point out that, ACEs isn't everything. There are things outside of ACEs that can still be incredibly traumatic. So the thing to learn from that is, what impacts one person a lot may not impact somebody else at all. So it's hard to define what trauma is because it looks different to everyone. So up until now, we've been talking about how a traumatic event can occur at one point in a person's life, but then it can have impacts later on in life. We saw that in that video. So really what I'm here talking about is, how does trauma manifest itself? How does it manifest itself in college students? Really what we know is histories of trauma kind of show up in our mental well-being. I mean, in college students, mental health is a major concern. So it's important to look at, how has mental health changed over the past few years, because life is just upside down right now. Like, we're not sure what we're doing. We're trying to navigate through this pandemic together, but it's just all trial and error. So looking at student mental health before COVID-19, there was an article, it was in 2019. It was in pre-COVID, and it was looking at, what do students typically struggle with? So most students who come to college, they're 18. They just turned 18, so they enter this world of adulthood, and there's all of these new responsibilities placed upon them. You have to strive for financial independence, you have to secure housing, you have to secure food, you're usually pushed to go into a new education or enter the workforce, or both. That's a lot of responsibilities. Just from the students that are here, like, are you feeling the pressure? Like, I'm 23, I still feel the pressure. I should have my stuff figured out by now. I clearly don't. So it's not uncommon for a student to struggle to achieve those things. And when they can't achieve all of those things, there's this created strain on the student. And so when we don't identify that strain and we don't intervene and support students who are struggling, it can only get worse. And that's when we start seeing students become depressed, have heightened levels of anxiety. They start struggling with clinical issues, things that go beyond our realm. But what we can do is we can learn how, as friends, as family, how to support that person who's struggling and keep it from getting that bad. So that's what I'm going to try to do, is I'm going to provide you a little nugget of the trainings that I've had, because I'm not qualified to teach the trainings I've gone through, but I can tell you what I've learned. And maybe you can take a little bit of what I've learned and apply it to a classmate, apply it to a student, and maybe do a little bit of good in somebody's life. So when COVID-19 was coming up, we were in a panic. We were moving to remote learning, we were moving to remote work, and we had no idea what that looked like. There was an article called The Trajectory of Loneliness in COVID-19. This article said that there were vulnerable groups during the pandemic. So the disabled, people who had children, and children were now having to learn at home. Students who were told that you had 2 weeks, then 3 days, then 1 day to move out of your residence hall. Like, those are vulnerable groups. So this article basically said these people were going to face heightened stress during the pandemic. And unfortunately we found out that that was true. Like, students are not okay. I heard a professor say that mentally students are dropping like flies. They weren't wrong. Has everyone seen the sign out of the quad that says 1 in 5 students are now facing a mental challenge? You've seen that? I read that every time I walk by, because I don't know what that means. I've never heard mental challenge used. So what do you think that means? Does that mean 1 in 5 students has a clinical disorder now? Does that mean 1 in 5 students are just not feeling okay? Does that mean 1 in 5 students are interacting with someone who's not okay? I don't know. I would argue that that number is actually greater. I would argue it's 1 in 3, 1 in 2, maybe 1 in 1. Because who here has somebody that they know who is just not doing okay? Like, most of us know somebody. Or some of us may just not be okay. And we put on our best face, we went out our door today, and we're just trying to be okay. So how is trauma related to mental health? I kind of mentioned it. When you have these long histories of exposure to violence, exposure to natural disaster, or exposure to a multitude of things, not only can your mental health develop poorly, but what you experience in college can also lead to stunted mental health. We talked about those prior histories of exposure. So if you get into a car accident, if somebody was sexually abused, if you were in a town and that town got leveled by a tornado and you just don't know how to cope, there's an issue with the coping mechanism then. And when you are repeatedly exposed to things, I'm a criminal justice student, so I'm going to use sexual abuse as an example. If you have a young girl who is sexually abused over and over and over and over as she's growing up, there's a neurobiological response to those trauma types. So everyone has that fight, flight, freeze response. Like if you were to walk out of the library, a dog comes up to you, you go to pet it and it growls. You like freeze, you're like, oh crap, what am I going to do? Like, how do I react? You're either going to fight the dog, and you're going to look really weird. You're going to run away from the dog, or you're going to freeze, and it's just going to look at you because you picked the worst of the three options. But when you've undergone several traumatic experiences, that fight, flight, or freeze can just come up at random. Like, your body doesn't know how to react properly. So if you are sexually abused by male figures throughout your life, and then you see someone that looks kind of like one of your abusers, that adrenaline dump, that fight, flight, freeze response can just happen. And it's not an appropriate response because you may not be in any immediate harm. But that creates a problem because now your anxiety is heightened, you're irritable, you're panicking, and you need professional help at that point. Like you need somebody to help bring you down. So that's called a crisis, and I'll talk about that towards the end of my spiel, like how do you interact with somebody who's in a crisis, because that's one of the things that goes beyond our pay grade. But there is a way that we can get that person to a professional so they can help them in that crisis. So why does this matter? Without reading what I have on the board, why do you think this topic matters? Mason?
Because it happens all the time, and it's a big problem in our society, you think?
Yeah, it really is. COVID only made it worse, like I kind of mentioned. Anyone else? I have this really incredible professor that when he asks a question and nobody answers, he just stares at them awkwardly. I've sat in a class for 5 minutes where he just stares at us. Nobody? All right. Well, I'm not that professor. All right, so why does this matter to students? Well, we live together. We interact together. Well, I was going to say we party together, but you guys don't party, right? You don't party? Not at all. Not at all. When peer support's crucial to developing resiliency and a solid support network. So you said that this stuff is happening to everyone. It's kind of true. Yeah, it's actually mostly true. Most people have undergone a traumatic experience. Some of those people are struggling to deal with their traumatic experiences. So if you have that support network that can understand what you've gone through and can support you, that's really important. But if you don't have that support network, you feel alone. And then there's less incentive to go out and do something about it. Go see a therapist, go on a walk, just do something to support yourself mentally. And if you don't have that peer support network, you're on your own. When a fellow student is experiencing unmediated distress or a mental challenge, relationships can become strained. This is using a personal example. I don't tell this often, but students were mentally dropping like flies during the pandemic. I was one of those students. And instead of having a good support network, I put all of my burdens on one person. One person. That person and I are no longer friends because it was too much for that individual. I didn't have a better support network, so at the end of the day, they had to say, I am sorry, I hope you're going to be okay, but I can't help you. Like, this is too much. This is affecting my own mental health. So, not only do you need to have a strong support network for when you're not feeling okay, but you can serve as somebody else's peer support. Why does this matter to faculty and staff? I put this reason up there because, it relates to both groups, but there's a better reason. In a university setting, grades and performance can be affected by mental challenges. Duh. Like, we know that. Let me find what I said about this. I had another article, I think. Yeah. If a student is not mentally okay, then the choices may be made poorly. Life choices. We're in college. We are making choices that are going to affect the rest of our life. What we study, how long we're in college, what kind of education we pursue. And so faculty and staff, they play a big role in that. You have advisors, you have teachers, you have people that you interact with. Those people help you make those lifelong decisions. And if you're not okay, you may not be communicating with them. And if you're not okay, you may not be making those positive choices. Like, I have seen people drop out of college because mentally they just can't do it anymore. And their life is changed by that one decision. Now, it may have been a decision that was best for them at the time, but that was a game-changing decision. Something very unique this semester is I have met people that have said, you know, I am coming to college now because I got so bad where I was that I needed to give myself a second chance. I find that interesting. I don't know what to think about that. Is that a good decision? Is that a bad decision? Are they setting themselves up for more responsibility and more pressure? Do they just need structure in their life? So talk to the people that are coming to college. Find out why they're coming. Because if they're coming here to get away from something that's negative, they may need some support from the get-go. Because college isn't easy. Do any of you think it's easy? Quinn's in a master's program. She'll tell you it's not easy. So, now, one of the biggest challenges people always tell me, because you know, I'm in a fraternity and I tell my guys all the time, you have to go and learn these things. You don't have to become a professional, but you have to go learn these things because they're affecting the people around you. So, isn't this best left to the professionals? Yes and no. There are times where you need a professional. There are times where you cannot pretend to be a professional. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But we as individuals have the ability to learn and develop our skill sets to support students with mental illness. So I went through a couple of those trainings that I mentioned, and I've had to apply those. Like, I had somebody that I knew that, it was a couple weeks ago, they messaged me and they said, hey, I'm not okay, I need help now. I dropped what I was doing. I knew how important that was. If I didn't have that training, I might have just gone, dude, I'm tired. Like, can I please just go to bed and we talk about this tomorrow? But when I found them, they were acting irrationally. They needed help. And if I didn't have the ability to just understand what that simple text message meant, that entire night could have gone differently for someone. I could have woken up to really bad news. So, how we can help without being pros. Again, please don't pretend to be a professional. Is anyone here a therapist? Is anyone here a counselor? Psychologist? Psychiatrist? Is anyone here just a professional mental health person? Great. That's okay. But please don't pretend to be them. You can do more harm than good if you try to pretend to be a professional. We do not have the ability to diagnose. We do not have the ability to provide treatment, and we are not going to try to do that. You know, diagnosing something, providing treatment like behavioral therapy, that is something that a professional needs to do. But we're working on this idea of something called informed social support. So, you three, you're friends, you're in a learning community. You're each other's social support. You two work together. You're social support. I mean, Tim and I are fraternity brothers. We're social support. So what if we had enough knowledge to identify if somebody in our social circle is just not doing okay? And then we have the ability to start that conversation. So when interacting and supporting people who are struggling, it's important to let your qualifications and limitations be known. It can be awkward doing this, but boundaries are important. So a couple of examples is, if I decide to interact with Mason because I don't think Mason's doing okay, and we decide to interact through text messages, I'll go, all right, Mason, you know, I'm here for you anytime, but you know, I can't be texting you at 3 a.m. I have to make sure that I can sleep too. Because if I can sleep and get my sleep, then I can better support you. Like, that's setting a boundary. Like, please don't call me at 3 in the morning. Please don't call me at 3 in the morning. But you also have to let your limits be known. Like, if somebody is saying, do you think I have depression? Do you think I have anxiety? Don't answer that question. Just say, hey, I'm not able to tell you that. Like, I don't know. There are people that you can go to. You can go to the Fort Hays Health and Wellness Center. You can go to High Plains. Those people will help you find the answers that you're asking. Providing alternatives when you're setting those limitations and boundaries. So if I tell Mason he can't call me at 3 in the morning because, you know, I need to sleep and maintain a healthy sleep schedule, I can provide a number for a hotline. Say, you know, if stuff gets really bad, call this number. Like, they will have people that are there 24/7 to talk to you. There will always be a resource. So when setting those limitations and boundaries, have some alternatives ready. Because that way the person knows that you're trying to take care of yourself, but that you're trying to help them at the same time. Does that make sense? Perfect. So being a supporter without putting your own well-being on the line. There are things called compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress, burnout. I mean, we've all heard of at least one of those things. If I go to Dr. Z and I start unloading all of this childhood trauma that I may or may not have, wouldn't you like to know? Then she can start experiencing some of the same traumatic stress that I'm going through because she's taking all of this on. I said that I lost a friend. It's because I put it all on him, and he started experiencing the things I was experiencing. That's called secondary traumatic stress. And that's just not a healthy thing to do, because then not only can you not effectively support someone, but now you've got your own battle to go through. So, the common signs of mental distress or decline in a student. This is where I'm going to give you just a nugget of the training that I've gone through. This is not an official training. I'm going to recommend that you go and find something. We do have mental health first aid offered as a course. I know Fort Hays Health and Wellness does offer it free periodically to students. Please, go take one of those. It is an 8-hour day. If you're taking it for the credit, there is a cost. But it's training that I've used, and they provide you this cool little manual that if you need a refresher, you can flip through it. It talks about substance use disorders, so drug and alcohol use. It talks about psychosis, it talks about depression, anxiety, and how to help people who are going through those things. So, common signs of mental distress or decline in a student. So this is clearly not a comprehensive list, but have any of you seen people that have done these things? So, noticeable change in levels of engagement during class. They were involved, now they're not involved. Like they just don't talk. Sudden absences or extended absences without notice. Like that should raise a red flag. Now it could mean a couple of things, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit, but that's something to watch out for. Decline in assessment and assignment test performance. Now we get it, we're students, we get tired halfway through the semester, we start doing things 12 minutes before it's due. And so it's not very quality work. But if I'm an average B student and then all of my grades are turning into U's, like my faculty, my advisor, people who have access to those things, they should notice that. They should go, oh, maybe I should email that student or pull them aside from class. For organizations, losing interest in your organization that you're in. So I've been in a fraternity, I've worked with a lot of guys, and I've had some guys that have dropped because of their mental health. They say, you know, I can't do this. Like, I've lost interest, I don't have the ability to keep interest, so I just can't do this. That's hard to do, but it also means, you know, I need to have a conversation and make sure they're okay. So other than this list, are there other things that you think can be signs of a student who's just not doing well? Now we're going to play the awkward eye stare game, because I want at least one person.
I've been friends with people in high school, and they went through all of those things, and I would ask them what's going on, and they would tell me, and they were actually going through something really terrible. And it was multiple people, like more than 2. It had to have been a lot more.
So, you know, in criminal justice, we talk about things that are pretty sensitive. Like, I'm sorry, I mentioned sexual abuse very casually. If you've gone through that experience, I am sorry that I just casually mentioned it and let it go. But you know, I was in a class where we were talking about sexual assault, and somebody had the guts to say, well, if she just didn't go out and party at night, maybe she wouldn't have been sexually assaulted. And then one of my classmates never came to class again. She was just not able, because she went through a similar experience, and she was just not able to come back to class because of that one person who said that. Like, it's not just a choice. It's not, you know, I'm not feeling this class anymore, I'm not going. It's, I can no longer be comfortable in this environment because it's kind of threatening, it's kind of hostile. So, keep going. So, this is the one where we're going to take a couple minutes. So, how do we sometimes invalidate or exacerbate distress? So, there are these subtle things that can happen in a classroom or within a learning environment that can kind of trigger someone, that can make somebody very uncomfortable, that can make somebody feel like they can no longer come back to class. So just for like the next 60 seconds while I get a drink and collect myself, talk with somebody. You go, think about, you know, what are the ways that we've sometimes done that in class on accident? Because I know none of you are intentionally going to do it, but there are ways we do it on accident. So, all right.
on my page.
You should know that. That's what people say.
How we have fascinating alligator exacerbate distress.
Like, if you ask questions, somebody laughs. Or says, like, we just went over that. Let me see the attitude. We just went over that. Girl, like, okay, sorry, it's over.
There's the like just do it Nike mentality. It's not that hard. You should just do it, get it over with.
Yeah, I told you. My parents, like,
Or it is what it is. Just like to be not. No, it's okay. No worries.
let's take a class. Both of us are in that class.
Well, hopefully she knows. Yep.
She will.
Maybe she does. All right, I want to hear at least two things that somebody thought of. Actually, I'm going to go over here to the faculty and staff.
I think there's the just do it sort of Nike mentality of it's not that hard, why can't you just do that? And telling someone that really sometimes is not helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not going through it, you don't know exactly what it looks like. So just telling somebody, you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like it sounds easy, but for some people it's just impossible.
The mentality of it is what it is, you know, where we're all laser focused on like the end result, but we're not understanding everything else that's going on around us.
It is what it is.
One that Emily and I talked about was how people try to compare themselves with other people's stress. You know, I'm really stressed right now, I have so much going on. Well, yeah, me too. I have 3 jobs, I have so much homework, and my aunt just died, this, and they just give you a long list of why they're stressed, and it invalidates your stress, saying like, oh, I guess mine's not that bad.
I have heard a student, she actually only said this a few weeks ago, you know, she told me, I don't want to go to the Health and Wellness Center because they're just so busy right now with other students that my problem probably isn't worth their time. Like, we've gotten so good at subtly invalidating distress that we're now doing it to ourselves. Saying, you know, my problem can't be that big. Clearly somebody else has it worse. That may be true, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve the support and, you know, the therapy that you might need. So some possible examples. So like when a student is just gone from class, we tend to assume that that student is lazy. You know, we don't ever really go find out why are they missing class. You know, maybe it's okay. Don't crucify me for this. It's okay to miss a class every now and then. If you need to, sleep in. Get that extra hour or 2 of sleep. But when you notice somebody hasn't come to class in 2-3 weeks, if you know them, find out why. I've seen Dr. Z, you know, a peer of mine, he came to class after, nearly 2-3 weeks, and as soon as she saw him, she went, "Are you okay?" Like, "Are you okay?" It's as easy as that. Not fully understanding how a topic may bother someone, so just being dismissive about a topic. So like sexual abuse, if you're just mentioning it casually, what you don't know is somebody could be having a very negative reaction to something that doesn't affect you at all. When some students dominate a discussion rather than letting others give input and share. So, you know, one of the best things that we can do is, you know, tell our stories. And if you have people in class who are not letting you share your input and your thoughts, you may feel kind of minimized. Like, you know, clearly my problems aren't that big because, you know, nobody wants to listen to what I have to say. This one guy just won't stop talking. It's kind of what I'm doing right now. I won't stop talking. Not taking input seriously, quickly dismissing it or mocking it. So, you know, a lot of my examples come from the same few people. And maybe I need to ask them if they're okay. So I took a tech and report writing class for criminal justice. And we had to, during roll call, we had to say something that happened to us that was surprising or different, that somebody else may have not gone through. And somebody said, when I was 7, I was on the swing and a meth lab exploded in a garage that was in my neighbor's house. Yeah, that definitely probably hasn't happened to anyone, but they just casually mentioned it, and somebody went, "You're probably pretty messed up from that, aren't you?" Yeah. So Like, we all nervously giggled at that, but like saying those things, even if you mean it as a joke, can strike a wrong chord with somebody. And then when a club member is not completing their duties, that assumption that they don't care or that they're also lazy. You know, it's great getting involved in organizations. We want you to get involved. I've been involved in tons of them. I've loved it. It's one of the biggest things I'm going to miss when I graduate. But there are times where people do struggle to complete what they need to complete. And maybe it's because of schoolwork, maybe it's because of other commitments, maybe it's because they're not okay. So don't make those assumptions, just ask the questions. You know, are you okay? So how to positively engage a student. So in mental health first aid, this 8-hour training, there's something called the ALGE model. And I'm not going to teach you the ALGE model because I'm not qualified to teach the ALGE model, but these are the big takeaways from it. So active listening. When a student comes to you, or when you ask a student, you know, is there something going on? Don't make it a two-way conversation. Let them talk. Just let them talk, listen, understand, acknowledge that or let them see that you're listening to them. That's huge. We'll talk about suicidal ideation here in a little bit. But simply asking somebody, are you thinking about killing yourself? Or are you thinking about harming yourself? Just asking that question, according to my PPR, suicide intervention training, reduces the risk of follow-through on that plan immediately. So just asking them if they're okay and then listening to what they have to say. Encourage the student to take care of themselves and engage in positive behavior. Get good sleep. Eat a good meal. Go and exercise. I know those are like the common things. Oh, you're depressed? Go on a walk. But having a regular exercise schedule is beneficial. It does help manage the symptoms of mental distress and mental illness. Provide follow-ups on a timeline that seems appropriate. So this is where we kind of have to go, you know, how much in need is this person? Like, should I check with them every day? Should I check with them a couple times a week? Should I check in with them just every couple weeks? So that's where you have to think, you know, how much do I need to support this person? Encourage them to pursue professional resources. We're not professionals. I've said that like 17 times. Please don't pretend to be a professional. But hey, we are at Fort Hays State University and we do have free access to mental health services. If you have a peer that's struggling, help them, engage with them, but also say, hey, you should go to the free tutoring therapy. So, and then encourage them to have other social supports such as their family and other friends. So if Mason is supporting Sophie, Mason can't be the only one supporting Sophie. Like, Sophie needs to establish positive connections with other people so that, you know, there's a group around her. It's not just this one person who then faces the risk of that burnout. So don't ever demand them to do things. You have to encourage them. You're not their life coach, you're not their parent, and you don't want them to develop a dependency on you. So if Isaiah's struggling and I say, Isaiah, you need to go exercise. And if he actually does that, and then I say, Isaiah, you need to go to bed at a good time, and then he does that, now Isaiah may start getting this idea of, you know, I'm just going to do what he tells me. I'm not his life coach. I can't do that. Like, I can't help him get through his issues. I can support him, but I can't do it for him. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. So when is the time to get serious? There are 2 times where this goes way beyond what we're able to do. What Dr. Chi is not able to do, what I'm not able to do, but what a mental health professional can do. So crisis is an event or period that will lead or may lead to an unstable and dangerous situation affecting an individual, group, or all of society. So we're more focused on that individual. So a crisis could be thinking irrationally. It could be panicking. It could be, I got to get out of here. Like, I'm not okay. I need to leave. I need to just get out of here. When a person's thinking irrationally, or they're uncontrollably crying, or they can't pull themselves together, they may be in a state of crisis. And you as an individual, you know, you can be there. You can go, hey, like, we're going to get through this. We're gonna eventually be okay. Let's find you a place to go. And that's when you can offer to walk them over to the counseling center, or you can offer to call law enforcement. They do provide mental health screenings. That's why I say that. So encourage that person to get to a place where they can be screened, because if they're in crisis, they need immediate professional help. The same goes for suicidal ideation. Suicide is technically a state of crisis, but this is a monster in its own, because suicide has permanent consequences. So when a person's thoughts or behaviors have become overwhelmingly concerned with death or dying, so this could be making a plan to harm yourself, looking for means to harm yourself, being fascinated with death. One of the biggest myths about suicide is that suicide is selfish. It's not true. Most people that when they're thinking of killing themselves are in this mindset that everyone's problems would be solved if I was no longer around to burden them. Like, that's not a selfish thought, is it? That's like you being willing to make the ultimate sacrifice because you think that will actually make everyone's life better. So that is where you all can get involved. You can say, you know, I'm glad you're here. I want you to stay here. Let's get you somewhere. Like, let's get you to the Kelly Center, health and wellness. Let's get you in front of that mental health screening. So please don't bring a person down from crisis on your own. I can't do that. I don't think you can do that. Please don't try to, you know, how do I want to word this? Don't not take action when somebody is suicidal. My QPR training, like I mentioned, said even if you just directly ask somebody, are you planning on killing yourself? Have you thought of killing yourself? Can reduce the risk of follow through. One of the myths is if you ask somebody, they're going to speed it up. They're going to go, oh crap, I've been found out. I'm going to go do it tonight. It's not true. It's just not true. So one other thing that I'm going to make people do, it's super awkward. Turn to somebody and seriously ask them. Like, if somebody says yes, like, I'm going to freak out. But this is just training, you know. It is awkward to ask somebody, if, like, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Or do you have a plan to kill yourself? Like, that's an awkward question, but that's an important question. Because then you know that something needs done. So do that. Find somebody. Practice asking them. Right now.
Yes. I'm going to tell him. She said yes. I said I'm going to tell him. Good.
Wasn't that awkward. But keep in mind that if you are able to ask that question, you can stop somebody from following through with a plan. Like, you could literally be the difference between life and death. Now, I'm not saying you have to go and find every single person who's struggling and try to be their savior. But what you can do is you can support the people around you just by going and learning, developing some of those skills, and, you know, being able to ask those questions. So, is that the end of my slides? I think that might be the end of my slides. So, y'all have clearly put up with me enough. So I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. Z.
Thank you, Garrett. I think potentially many topics today we talked about this could consider traumatic, but in the meantime, I think to be able to identify and recognize experiences and potential problems and coping mechanisms is extremely important. And a lot of times, even this hard question, really building upon that rapport that you have and mutual trust. So I think it's crucial for us to engage in this conversation, in this closed community, and further think, how can we do better together? And after Garrett's discussion mainly on the experiences as college student and some of the scale of trauma and anxiety really demonstrated in your learning and everyday life, I think I want to mention a little bit more about how to address this intersectionality of trauma and mental health in both teaching and the learning interaction between faculty members and students. One of the things I really believe that even for me in the past 4 years I worked at Fort Hays State University, I frequently observe students undergone through anxiety, depression, stress, and many times they may have various coping mechanisms to facing those challenges. And sometimes they may seeking professional help. Sometimes they do have that resiliency, for example, a support group such from family, friends, but sometimes they may not have. And I do multiple times observed the transitioning with those resiliency factors, for example, support, they demonstrate very different behaviors, outcomes. And then as a faculty, I do care about their behavior, their life, not only inside of the classroom, but also outside, because what they bring inside the classroom really demonstrate their ability to learn well in the class. So when you're looking at trauma and learning, research did show that for some, school can be the only safe place for the students. I think this is also very important due to during the pandemic, when students has to leave campus immediately. Many students felt that the only safe or community for them is no longer there. They have to go somewhere they do not consider as a home or as a community. Also, many students who are affected by trauma also have trouble engage at school. I think this is a very natural understanding, because if you cannot perform well in everyday life, you likely cannot really engage in critical thinking and productivity in the classrooms. So in a way, we're really trying to ask the question, trauma-informed learning, and what that even looks like. Once again, I think I'm not really trying to say here are the only ways as a faculty or staff members we could engage in to support students. And I personally also continually engage in trainings and reflect on my teaching techniques, and then continue learning about how to do better and to implement this trauma-informed learning methods. But I do have some advice or suggestions or practices to share with the audience today. So as a faculty, I think it's very important to focus on self-regulation in terms of how to observe and manage students' responses and reactions to the classroom materials, and also value that relationship in terms of relation with your students and well-being growth and academic achievement. I think that is extremely important. In a way, students' performance is important, both for the faculty member but also for the students. However, I think what is also important to recognize that relationship building, the growth from that entire learning process, to see the students make that stride to make better every time. And also appreciate impact of trauma in the classroom instead of minimizing or ignoring those experiences. Also really learning about unidentified needs. How students learn. Are they a visual learner, audio learner? Do they like to telling stories? Instead they like to looking at numbers. To give them the opportunity to really trump in their learning process is extremely important to identify their experiences. And in a way, you celebrate their resiliency through the learning process. So in a way, as a faculty member and also continuing as a learner in a trauma learning perspective, we really hope that we could recognize that growth through the learning process, be able to provide opportunities for students to access those moments that they know they are making great stress, and then a stride. And as faculty members also understand that to be able to build that professional relation, to understand stress it's going through, extremely important to mutually encourage each other on the process. Basically, I just mentioned the slides a little bit ahead of my time. But let's see challenges and opportunities. I think as a final remark, challenges in terms of the trauma, stress, anxiety experience in the higher education, it's definitely a challenge in terms of how that may impact your performance in the classroom. But also by identifying trauma, by practicing trauma for the learning process, you're really giving the opportunities to provide those coping strategies and allowing the classroom become a community and allow the students thrive in their learning process.
May I throw something in there?
Yes, yes.
I think one of the things that I've seen a lot of students do is, even though they're not in an okay position, they will still try to help somebody else. You have to focus on yourself first. Not only when you're interacting with somebody who is struggling, but if you're struggling yourself, then you can't provide the best support possible. So make sure you're doing okay. If you need to go see a counselor, go see a counselor. If your form of resiliency is going and learning about that topic, do it. But just don't say, I'm going to be okay as long as I help other people. Like, that creates a dependency, because then if you have nobody to help, like if everyone's okay and now you're the only one not okay, you're alone. And you don't know what to do because you've created this lifestyle of, I'll be okay as long as I'm helping somebody else.
And then I know we only give about an hour discussion on many issues. You may feel really overwhelmed with the information. So we do have a kind of a list in terms of for the audiences if you want to kind of learn a little bit more about trauma. The first one is a website called Trauma Informed Care Implementation Resource Center. It's really an education center for both faculty, staff, really looking at what are the resources out there for you to implement small steps in your teaching and your interaction with students. And another one is a classic reading, The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and the Body in the Healing of Trauma. And this is one of the Golden Bible actually for social worker students who really want to kind of dive into what trauma really meant to the individual and to the society. And of course, we have resources, the Health and Wellness Center, formerly called the Cali Center. And then ASDAC. ASDAC is a training center located in Hutchinson, Kansas. I believe they primarily looking at how trauma and learning interacted into K-12 schools. So if you ever a passionate learner about trauma-informed teaching, I think this is a great place to check it out. And also National Alliance on Mental Illness. I think, Garrett, you have something to say about this, right?
Yeah, I was a member. We do have a campus chapter of NAMI. It's a great way to get involved because NAMI isn't necessarily a mental health institute. It's kind of a support, awareness, and advocacy group. So in town we have a NAMI organization, and how I understand it is for people who are supporting loved ones or people that they know with mental illness. And NAMI is just this place for these people to go to find out, how do I better support this person? Our campus does often put on panels through NAMI on mental health. They show films, they have discussions. So even if you're not in the mental health, if you're not psychology, sociology, social work, even criminal justice, but this is interesting, you can join NAMI. If you are in organizations and you want to make sure that your friends in that organization are doing okay, reach out to Health and Wellness. Say, hey, can we just get somebody to talk to our club, our organization, just for one meeting, 30 minutes on like, how do I take care of myself checklist? Because then you're taking the step to making sure that, you know, the people in your organization are aware of what they need to do to be okay.
And that concluded our presentation today, and then there are some of the resources we referred to support our argument. So thank you so much for everybody's attendance. I think we are kind of over time. Do we still want to have some question time?
So I think the event's officially over, but if anyone has questions, we'll be here for the next several minutes. All right.
Thanks so much.